This video is brought to you by patreon.com/worsttake. Get access to exclusive live streams and Discord servers, on-screen shoutouts, and early access to some videos when you join now. Help make sure that we can continue to make content like this by supporting the Patreon. Links are in the description down below. When talking about the national media, it seems like there's two predetermined conclusions about the national media, right? Either national media has gotten coverage has gotten worse over the years, or it's always been bad and now you're just paying attention close enough to know why it's bad. But I don't think either of those two are the answers about national media coverage. I think there is a secret third option that's probably exposes why national media coverage can feel on point for some teams and not so on point for a lot of other teams. See, I think there is a Goldilocks zone for national media coverage. And what I mean by that is there are certain types of teams that I think the media nationally can cover pretty well because it's not about the little details with these teams. It's about the big details. And those two types of teams are teams that are awful and teams that are established and really, really good, right? The national media does an excellent job of covering the Kansas City Chiefs, the Golden State Warriors. I don't know who's hot in baseball right now, but I guess the New York Yankees, right? They do a great job of covering those consistent winners on established brands. You can even throw like the Cowboys in there, right? And there are reasons that they are good at covering those teams. And I think the reason they're good at covering those teams are, one, those are the teams that they watch the most. They're on national TV the most. They're on the networks that these guys work on and promote these games for. They are heavily incentivized to talk about these games. They're heavily incentivized to continue conversation about these games. And because these teams usually play on national TV, you're going to have more than one or two segments about that team, which again encourages you to be a little bit sharper when talking about that team, because your coverage of that team is going to have to require a little bit more depth, because you're not asked to give one segment every month about them. You're asked to give 5 or 6 segments a day about them, about different aspects about them. So a lot of your brain power goes towards those teams. And I think that for the most part, if you are an established national brand that's been winning for a while, like the Lakers are a team that doesn't even win, but the media does a good job of covering the Lakers because they watch the Lakers the most, because the Lakers are still the most nationally televised team, or one of the most nationally televised teams in the NBA. You get my point. They watch these teams more. They have to talk about these teams more, which leads them to do more work about those teams. Now, on the flip side of this, I do think the national media does a good enough job of covering the awful teams. And the reason that is because, well, like, I still think the media can be wrong about a lot of the small details about these teams that aren't good because they don't watch them. But you don't need to watch the Carolina Panthers to have an opinion about them that they're not good. Right? Like, this is something that a lot of people just ain't gonna fact check you on. If you want to go on a rant about the Carolina Panthers being a terrible organization, nobody's going to stand in the way of that. Carolina Panthers fans aren't going to stand in the way of that because they're equally as frustrated with the organization, probably more than you are, right? So they're not going to stand in the way of somebody amplifying their point. And even if the organization itself tries to defend itself, nobody cares what a team that is seen as a loser has to say to defend themselves. So they do a good job of covering those teams. I don't think people really objected to national media coverage as much. I'm pretty sure there was some, but as much when the Browns were truly awful, right? Like, I don't think people were really that hot about it. But really, since 2018, I've felt that Browns fans have been increasingly more and more disappointed with national coverage of the team. And that's because at around 2018, the Browns entered a realm of teams that ESPN and just the national apparatus of media coverage is not equipped to cover. And these are teams that are good, but haven't had breakthrough success, right? Like the Kansas City Chiefs aren't in a giant market, but they're one of the most well-covered teams in the NFL because they have Patrick Mahomes, the league's biggest star, and they've won 3 Super Bowls. The Browns have not had that level of success. They're not the Cowboys, so they're not on national TV every week. So these are teams that do have a lot of people who are willing to defend them because they're not bad teams, who kind of get covered in a way nationally that's like a team that you would only talk about every once in a while when it comes to the rotation of how the national media talks about these things and when these topics get up. And it really exposes that you just can't expect one person to not just have an opinion about all 32 teams, but have an opinion about all 32 teams that's informed while also being asked to like cover other things along with that. Like think about Stephen A. Smith. Stephen A. Smith talks about basketball and he talks about football on a pretty full-time basis. And this is why I find it hard to get mad at a Stephen A. Smith take. And it's not because I don't respect what Stephen A. Smith has done. I've read his book. I'm a fan of how he's got through his career. I'm not necessarily like a Stephen A. Smith fan. I don't watch Stephen A. Smith shows for my own fun, but I do know enough about him to respect the job that he's done and cultivated over the years. And to me, it's kind of ridiculous that ESPN expects him to have an opinion on like 60 different teams. And now he's like giving out opinions on different leagues and stuff. Why? You know what I mean? Why does he have to have an opinion on all of these things? And maybe Stephen A. wants to have an opinion on all of these things. But the truth is that an informed opinion is not going to be had when you're asking that person to have an informed opinion about everything. Nobody is that informed. Think about this. I do this channel. I give what I think to be a pretty well-informed opinion about the Cleveland Browns. In order to do this, it's a full-time job. It's multiple videos a week during the offseason. It's 3 videos a day during the regular season. It's film breakdowns. It's rewatches. It's consistently looking through the statistics and looking for a statistical pattern. It's consistently talking with other people who do just as much, if not more work than me about the Cleveland Browns, about how they feel about it. It's reaching out to other people who cover teams at the same level that I covered them and reaching out to them about how they feel about their teams and if they feel like anything is similar. And it's a lot of work just to get a good grasp on one team like the Cleveland Browns. Because the truth about teams like the Cleveland Browns that are good teams, can contend, but not necessarily national favorites, not necessarily a team that's going to max out their national TV slots. They are teams that the media who covers them nationally are going to have to talk about on some level. That talk that they have about that team is going to be scrutinized, unlike when they talk about a bad team, right? So that talk's going to be scrutinized and criticized. And it's going to become obvious that some of these people who are covering from a national perspective are basing their opinions about the Cleveland Browns or teams like the Cleveland Browns, teams in that same realm as the Cleveland Browns, off of like a 2 to 3 game sample. We don't know how hard or closely they were watching those games when they watched them, right? Because again, this isn't like the Dallas Cowboys or the Kansas City Chiefs where you know you're going to have 45 segments on those games. This is a game where you might have to talk about it leading into a commercial break, maybe. And what you see when you get these takes, if you're a fan of a team in that range, right? I think Jacksonville is a team similar to Cleveland. I think Houston is a team similar to Cleveland, where you get a lot of coverage about this team, or you get some coverage about this team, but every time you get it, you feel like something is missing. And that's because you're getting an opinion that's based off of maybe a 2 or 3 game sample and a stat sheet that they got handed to them by their producers 10 minutes before the segment went live. That's what they're basing the opinion off of. And again, if that team is a 2-win team, okay, that's enough information to go off of because nobody is going to be willing to challenge those opinions. But when that's a opinion that you have on an 8 to 9 to 10 to 11 win team, then people gonna look at you crazy because they know that you're not telling the truth or that you're not working off of enough information to have an informed take. And when that's the case, when people are in the position to challenge what you're saying because they believe the team is better than what you're giving it credit for, they're gonna notice that there are a lot of small details omitted. So that brings me to our ESPN clip of the day. We're going to talk about a clip from ESPN NFL Live where they're talking about what is the Browns' potential or ceiling with a healthy Deshaun Watson. We're going to go through this clip, but I'm going to point out something that's missing that's a pretty big detail in our world, but a small detail to them that really does kind of change how you feel about the whole segment. But let's get into it.
I believe as a franchise, they have a high floor because of the defense and a low ceiling because of the quarterback. Last year, when you look at what they allowed as far as first downs, it was historically good. The worst team in the league at allowing first downs, Mina Kimes, Seattle Seahawks. However, the Cleveland Browns had 30 less first downs than any other team in the NFL on defense. That is historic. I think on the offensive side of the ball, Deshaun Watson has no proof of concept he's going to be anything other than mediocre in Cleveland. His numbers across the board, I think it's 2 yards per attempt down in his Houston tenure. Touchdown percentage goes from 6% to 4%. We just haven't seen anything from Deshaun Watson to show that they're going to win because of him instead of despite him. So I think there's going to be a lot of growing pains. I don't have a lot of expectations for that offense. The defense is going to win them games, and they will win.
All right, so let's get to that first part, that last part of that take real quick. I just want to make sure that stays in everybody's heads, that there's no proof that the Browns can win because of him versus in spite of him, because he's not the only person with that take. That's a fairly common take that I do want to challenge because I haven't seen enough people challenge that take enough. But I will agree with him about the defense, right? I talk about all the time. I think too much credit was given to the multiple different quarterback angle of this, and more credit deserves to be on the defense. The reason the Browns were able to win with all those quarterbacks wasn't because they were getting crazy quarterback play at any given time. It's because they had a really good defense that didn't require much from the quarterback position in order to get to 11 games. And I think that that's a fair take to have about the Cleveland Browns. And I think he's also right, when he points out how Watson's not throwing the ball as deep anymore, how he's not completing the balls downfield as a high clip. Like, I do agree with him that Watson has not been used so far by the Cleveland Browns in the same way that Watson was used by the Houston Texans, in a way that got him that $230 million guaranteed contract from the Cleveland Browns. They have not used him to that level. The part of his take that I have issue with, this is the part that I wanted to make sure that I pointed out and was on your mind when I started to talk about his take, which is his whole point about there is no evidence that the Browns have won games because of Deshaun Watson instead of in spite of Deshaun Watson. Now, my issue with that take is, one, the framing of it, right? Because it's not a binary when you talk about like how you win a football game in the NFL. And it's not, did you win the game because of the quarterback or in spite of the quarterback? It's not a yes or no question. Usually that exists on a bit of a spectrum. And the real question is, how much did that quarterback contribute to winning? And if the argument is that in all of the wins that the Browns had with Deshaun Watson as a starting quarterback, especially the ones that Deshaun Watson started and finished, that Deshaun Watson was not a factor in the Cleveland Browns winning that game, I think that's verifiably false. Okay, like, I can bring up a few numbers here that will pretty much disprove that. If Deshaun Watson wasn't a factor and actually the Browns were winning in spite of Deshaun Watson, then their plus or minus numbers wouldn't have been affected by Deshaun Watson not being in the game. But Deshaun Watson has a plus 63 point differential. The second closest on the team was Joe Flacco at plus 10 in the regular season. I think minus 7 when you include the postseason. So a significant difference from what Deshaun Watson, the point differential was with Deshaun Watson versus what it was with other quarterbacks. So that's one thing, but that might not convince you. You're talking about the wins, right? What did Deshaun Watson do in these wins that helped the Cleveland Browns win? Deshaun Watson, in the 4 games that he started and finished as Cleveland Browns quarterback, in 4 wins, had 7 touchdowns, 2 turnovers, 995 yards, and 2 2-point conversion, successful 2-point conversions. In those 4 wins, 2 of those wins came against top 5 quarterbacks. And in each of those games, Deshaun Watson scored a 4th quarter touchdown to put the game away or led a game-winning drive. In the case of Baltimore, both. So how exactly was Deshaun Watson not a factor in any of the wins that he had this season? That does not scream a team that's winning in spite of their quarterback. Now, it might not be that they're winning because of their quarterback, but when your defense is this good, you're not going to win because of one thing, right? Deshaun Watson was certainly a factor to the Cleveland Browns' success when he was on the field. This is a take that not enough people challenge. I have seen people lazily throw out the whole, well, the Browns didn't win any games because of Deshaun Watson. And to me, that's a take that's easily challengeable if you watch these games in good faith. Because there is no other quarterback that would have those numbers in those wins that you would say was not a factor in that team winning the game. He was significantly a factor on why the Browns won the 4 games that he started, finished, and won. He was also a significant factor in the 1 game they lost, with him starting and finishing, by the way, which is fair to point out. But 5 games, he was a significant factor in all of them, positive or negative. So, to me, the take that Deshaun Watson had nothing to do with any of his wins is a take that kind of disqualifies somebody from being taken serious about their perspective on the Browns to me, because it demonstrates that either A, you did not watch the games enough to really have an opinion that I care about, or 2, you didn't watch these games in good faith and you kind of just watched them to try to pick Watson apart instead of just watching them for what they were. And I'm not somebody who comes on this channel and tells you Watson was like playing at an all-pro level or something crazy like that. I'm pretty fair with how I talk about Watson. Like, I'm not a big fan. Like, his biggest fans aren't the biggest fans of me, and neither are his biggest detractors. I think I sit in a pretty good spot where people are just like, they want the team to win and they want somebody to be reasonable about what they're seeing. And that's where I sit, or at least where I like to think I sit in this whole conversation. And I'm telling you right now, that take is a disqualifyingly bad take when it comes to your coverage of the Cleveland Browns. If that is your take, it is misinformed. It is verifiably false. And it's something that you can't just throw out there and shouldn't be challenged, because it doesn't hold up to any challenge of any level or any scrutiny of any level. And if that's the case, then what you're saying is probably bullshit. There are 2 takes with the Cleveland Browns that if I hear them from somebody, I just disqualify them from conversation about the Browns. One, if you thought that DeAnthony Bell was the number 1 safety on the Cleveland Browns, I don't care what else you have to say about the team. 2, if you thought Amari Cooper was overrated and he quit on the team, like that one article said, I don't care what you have to say about the team anymore. And 3, if you throw out this whole like, oh, well, Deshaun Watson, they won in spite of him all 4 games he won. Because it's obvious they did it. It's obvious they did it. Obvious they did it. Disqualified. I don't care. Let's hear what Mina Kimes has to say.
I wasn't surprised that they didn't bring back Joe Flacco, because his performance last season, I feel like, would have hung over this team if he had come back as the backup and Watson had struggled. But the memory of watching that offense have success nevertheless remains, especially, I imagine, for Kevin Stefanski, who it felt like with Joe Flacco, was able to call exactly the sort of offense we expect from him, the sort of offense we saw in Minnesota. And when I watch Watson, when I've seen him, and obviously somewhat limited snaps or given his injuries in this offense, it has felt to me like the quarterback and the play caller, Stefanski, still aren't quite on the same page. Whereas with Flacco, it felt like, okay, this is exactly what he wants to do. And I think that's what I'll be curious to see early on. Yet another offseason. Have they developed the sort of chemistry required to put this team over the top? Because the team, as Kevin said, is extremely strong. Defense, skill players, offensive line, all of it. The quarterback remains the question mark.
Let's stay in the back.
Now, I don't think anything that Mina Kimes said in there is wrong. Does it look like there's always been consistent friction between what Kevin and Deshaun want to get accomplished on the offensive end of the ball? Yeah, we've talked about that on this channel. Does that lead into uncertainty about the quarterback position? Yes. My issue with Mina's take here is that I don't think she lied about anything she said or said any misinformation, but I do think she omitted some key information that really should have been brought up, right? When you're bringing up the Joe Flacco thing, like, yes, did the offense look like Kevin was able to call the more traditional offense that he's used to calling? Yeah, because Joe Flacco fits what Kevin Stefanski is used to. It's no secret. You look at Kevin Stefanski's quarterback list and the guys he's had, Kirk Cousins, Case Keenum, Jacoby Brissett, even Baker Mayfield to an extent. Those are all guys who play more similar to Joe Flacco than they play like Deshaun Watson. So that's a obvious comfort zone of not just his, but Alex Van Pelt's as well. The part where I'm like, hey, you're kind of omitting stuff is one of the turnovers with Flacco. Like, yes, the offense looked like Kevin was more comfortable from a play calling perspective, but the turnovers were like exploding at an even higher level than what they were before. So maybe that might not have been as good of a thing as people are making it out to be. And two, and I think the most important point here is that that's exactly why the Browns made the move to get rid of Alex Van Pelt and move on to Ken Dorsey. Now, I don't think that they forgot this stuff or that they left it out to be malicious. It's a 3-minute segment. They don't have that much time to bring up that much information. But this leads to like the frustration I think people have, because even when somebody who is very smart, very good at her job, like Mina Kimes, talks about this team, either she doesn't have enough time or she's not pushed in the direction to kind of say something that paints a fuller picture of what the Cleveland Browns are going through, right? Like both of these analysts basically pointed the whole Deshaun Watson chaos angle of it, which there is a side of that picture that should and could be painted. But when you omit obvious things that are being done to kind of correct the wrongs that you're mentioning, then it kind of feels like you just are trying to make a picture up out of nowhere, which is where I would have the whole issue with what Mina Kimes says here. But that's my thoughts on this take and just the coverage in general from national outlets. I'm going to put ESPN on the title because ESPN is kind of ubiquitous with national media coverage. But I think this is I think this is an issue with national media coverage in general. But let me know what you guys think in the comment section down below. Y'all have a great day. Have an even better night. Peace.